The morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Augustine's Cathedral, casting rainbow prisms across the polished marble floor. I stood before the full-length mirror in the bridal suite, my heart hammering against my ribcage as my maid of honor, Karen, adjusted the delicate lace train of my grandmother's vintage wedding dress. "You look absolutely radiant, Pamela," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "Like a dream come to life." I couldn't speak. The emotion was too overwhelming. After 3 years of dating Lance, 2 years of engagement, and months of meticulous planning, this moment had finally arrived. The day I would become Mrs. Lance Wellington. The day that would mark the beginning of our forever. My reflection stared back at me, pearl earrings catching the light, my mother's diamond necklace resting against my collarbone, and the cathedral-length veil cascading down my back like a waterfall of ivory silk. The dress hugged my figure perfectly, its intricate beadwork telling the story of 3 generations of brides in my family. I had never felt more beautiful, more complete, more ready for the future that awaited me. "Are you nervous?" Karen asked, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Nervous? No," I breathed, my voice barely a whisper. I'm home. Lance is my home." The words felt like truth in my bones. Lance Wellington, successful architect, devoted fiancé, the man who brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning and left little love notes in my lunch bag. The man who proposed to me on the beach where we had our first kiss, getting down on one knee just as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The man who cried when I said yes, holding me so tight I thought my heart might burst from happiness. A knock at the door interrupted my reverie. "5 minutes, ladies," called the wedding coordinator, her voice bright with professional enthusiasm. My stomach fluttered with anticipation. In 5 minutes I would walk down that aisle toward the altar where Lance waited. In 5 minutes I would become his wife and he would become my husband. The thought sent shivers of joy racing through my entire body. "Ready?" Karen asked, lifting my bouquet of white peonies and baby's breath. Lance's favorite flowers, chosen specifically because he once mentioned how their sweet fragrance reminded him of his grandmother's garden. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. We made our way to the cathedral's entrance, where my father stood waiting in his perfectly pressed tuxedo, his eyes misty with paternal pride. "My beautiful daughter," he murmured, offering me his arm. "I've never seen you more radiant." Through the heavy wooden doors, I could hear the gentle murmur of our guests. 200 of our closest friends and family members, all gathered to witness our union. The string quartet began the opening notes of Pachelbel's canon in D, and my heart soared. This was it. This was the moment I had dreamed of since I was a little girl playing dress-up in my mother's wedding veil. The doors opened and a collective gasp of admiration rippled through the congregation. I felt their eyes on me as I began my slow procession down the rose-petal-strewn aisle, but my focus was singular, unwavering. There at the altar stood Lance. He looked magnificent in his midnight blue tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, his hands clasped behind his back in that endearingly nervous way he had. But it was his face that took my breath away, the pure, unadulterated love shining in his green eyes, the way his lips curved into that soft smile that was meant only for me. He wiped a tear from his cheek and I felt my own tears threatening to fall. Each step brought me closer to him, closer to our future. The cathedral seemed to hold its breath, the very air charged with the sacred weight of the moment. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the altar like a scene from a fairy tale. The scent of white roses and lilies filled the air, and the soft rustle of silk and taffeta created a gentle symphony as our guests rose to their feet. Halfway down the aisle, Lance mouthed the words, "I love you," and I felt my heart expand until it seemed too big for my chest. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as I had dreamed it would be. 3/4 of the way to the altar, I could see the minister waiting with his warm, welcoming smile. I could see Lance's best man, his brother Casper, grinning from ear to ear. I could see my mother in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. The moment was crystalline, perfect, frozen in time like a photograph. I was just 10 steps from the altar when it happened. The cathedral doors burst open with a sound like thunder, and every head turned toward the back of the church. The string quartet faltered and fell silent. A collective gasp echoed through the sacred space, followed by an eerie, suffocating silence. At first I couldn't process what I was seeing. A woman stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright morning light streaming in from behind her. She was tall, with long auburn hair that cascaded over her shoulders, wearing a simple navy dress that hugged her curves. But it wasn't the woman herself that made my blood turn to ice. It was what surrounded her. Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge tales of life. Enjoy listening. 3 children. 3 beautiful, dark-haired children who couldn't have been older than 8, 5, and 3. The oldest, a boy, clung to the woman's right hand while she carried the youngest, a little girl with Lance's distinctive green eyes, on her hip. The middle child, another boy, stood slightly behind her, his small fingers gripping the fabric of her dress. The woman's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she called out, her words carrying clearly through the stunned cathedral. "But I couldn't let this happen. I couldn't let him do this to another woman." My father's arm tensed beneath my hand. I felt Karen step closer behind me, her breath sharp with shock. The congregation began to murmur, confusion and alarm rippling through the pews like wildfire. The woman began walking down the aisle, her children in tow, her heels clicking against the marble floor with deliberate precision. Each step she took felt like a nail being driven into my chest. This couldn't be happening. This was my wedding day. My perfect, beautiful wedding day. "My name is Catherine Wellington," she announced, her voice steady despite the chaos she had unleashed. "And this man," she pointed directly at Lance, "is my husband." The words hit me like physical blows. "Husband." He said husband. The cathedral erupted into chaos. Gasps, whispers, the scraping of shoes against marble as people shifted in their seats. Someone in the back pews let out an audible, "Oh my God." But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was stand there, frozen as this stranger, this woman, continued her march toward the altar, toward Lance, toward the man I was supposed to marry in less than 5 minutes. "These are our children," Catherine continued, her voice never wavering. "Michael, Benny, and Julia. Lance's children. The children he abandoned when he moved to Chicago 3 years ago to start fresh, as he put it. 3 years ago. The same time he and I had started dating. The timeline crashed over me like a tsunami and I felt my knees threaten to buckle. My father's grip on my arm tightened, the only thing keeping me upright. "No," I whispered, the word escaping my lips involuntarily. "No, this isn't. This can't be." But even as I said it, I knew. Deep in my bones, in that terrible place where truth lives even when we don't want to acknowledge it, I knew she was telling the truth. The children's features were too familiar, too distinctly Lance. The boy Michael had his strong jawline. Little Benny had his nose. And Julia. God, Julia had his eyes, his smile, even the way he tilted his head when he was curious. I had to turn to him. I had to see his face. I had to see him deny this, to see the confusion and outrage I was sure must be written across his features. Because Lance wouldn't do this to me. Lance loved me. Lance was good and honest and true. Lance was my future, my heart, my home. I turned toward the altar, my movement feeling sluggish, as if I were moving underwater. "Lance." I called out, my voice cracking. "Lance, tell them this isn't true. Tell them she's lying. Tell them." But when I saw his face, when I looked into those green eyes that I had loved so desperately, my heart didn't just break. It shattered. It disintegrated. It turned to dust and blew away on the wind of his betrayal. Because Lance Wellington, the man I was about to marry, the man I had given 3 years of my life to, the man I had trusted with my heart and soul and future, wasn't looking at me with confusion or outrage or denial. He wasn't rushing to my defense or demanding that this woman be removed from our wedding. Lance was staring at Catherine and the 3 children with a look of pure, undiluted terror. His face had gone ashen, his hands trembling at his sides. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. And in his eyes, those beautiful green eyes I had dreamed of looking into as we exchanged vows, I saw guilt. I saw shame. I saw the absolute confirmation of every terrible word Catherine had spoken. He knew them. He knew all of them. These weren't strangers crashing our wedding. This was his family. His real family. The family he had abandoned to be with me. "Oh God," I breathed, the words torn from my chest like a physical wound. Oh my God, it's true. The cathedral seemed to tilt around me. The beautiful stained glass windows blurred into abstract smears of color. The faces of our guests became a sea of horrified expressions, mouths agape, eyes wide with shock and pity. Pity for me, the pathetic bride who had been played for a fool. Pamela, I can explain, Lance finally managed to croak, taking a step toward me. But his voice was weak, defeated. The voice of a man who had been caught, not the voice of an innocent man defending his honor. Explain. I repeated, the word tasting like poison in my mouth. Explain how you have a wife and 3 children that you somehow forgot to mention. Explain how you've been living a lie for 3 years. Explain how you were about to marry me while your real family, your real wife, was somewhere else, wondering where their husband and father had gone. Catherine had reached the front of the cathedral now, her children pressed close to her sides. Up close, I could see that she was beautiful, not in the polished magazine-perfect way I had always strived for, but in a natural maternal way that spoke of sleepless nights and soccer games and birthday parties. The kind of beauty that came from loving someone unconditionally and being loved in return. The kind of beauty that came from being a real wife, a real mother. Everything I had thought I was about to become. I'm sorry, Catherine said, and I realized she was speaking to me now. I'm so sorry to do this to you on your wedding day. But I couldn't let him do to you what he did to me. I couldn't let him make you another victim of his lies. Another victim, I whispered, the words hitting me like bullets. That's what I was. A victim. A mark. A woman stupid enough to believe that she had found her happily ever after with a man who was already living one with someone else. Daddy. The little boy, Benny, spoke for the first time, his voice high and sweet and innocent. Why is everyone crying? Why is that lady in the pretty dress sad? The sound of that small voice calling Lance daddy was the final straw. Whatever composure I had been clinging to shattered completely. A sound escaped me that was part sob, part scream, part death rattle of every dream I had ever had about our future together. You bastard, I hissed, my voice carrying clearly through the shocked silence of the cathedral. You lying, cheating, heartless bastard. Lance flinched as if I had slapped him. Pamela, please let me. Let you what? Let you lie to me some more? Let you explain how this is all some terrible misunderstanding? How you just forgot that you had a wife and 3 children when you proposed to me on the beach? When you moved in with me? When you spent 2 years planning our wedding? The questions poured out of me like blood from a mortal wound. Each word was a blade, cutting him, cutting me, cutting through the fairy tale I had been living and revealing the nightmare beneath. I never meant for this to happen, Lance said weakly. Pamela, you have to believe me, I never wanted to hurt you. But you did hurt me. I screamed, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. You destroyed me. You took my heart and my trust and my love and you used them to build a lie. A 3-year lie. I yanked off my engagement ring. The 2-carat princess cut diamond he had chosen so carefully, the ring I had admired 1,000 times, the ring that had made me feel like the luckiest woman in the world, and hurled it at his feet. It clattered against the marble, the sound sharp and final in the stunned silence. Pamela, don't do this, he pleaded, but his voice was barely a whisper. Don't throw us away. Don't throw away everything we have. Everything we have? I laughed, the sound bitter and broken. What do we have, Lance? What did we ever have? A relationship built on lies. A love that was stolen from your real family? A future that was never really ours to claim. Catherine stepped forward, her children still clinging to her. He left us, she said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. 3 years ago he said he needed space. He said he was going on a business trip to Chicago. That business trip became a month. That month became 6 months. Then a year. Then radio silence. She looked directly at me and I saw compassion in her eyes. Compassion for me even though I was the other woman. Even though I was the one who had unknowingly stolen her husband. I found out about you 6 months ago, she continued. A private investigator I hired finally tracked him down. I've been watching, waiting, trying to decide what to do. When I saw the wedding announcement in the Chicago Tribune, I knew I couldn't let him do to you what he did to me. The wedding announcement. The beautiful photo of Lance and me, smiling and radiant, announcing our upcoming nuptials to the world. The announcement I had been so proud of, so excited to see in print. Another knife in my chest. I could have exposed him quietly, Catherine said. I could have called you, sent you evidence, let you make the choice. But I wanted him to face the consequences of his actions. I wanted him to see what his lies had cost. What they had cost all of us. I looked around the cathedral at the faces of our guests. My family, my friends, my colleagues, all of them staring at me with expressions of horror, pity, and disbelief. My mother was openly weeping in the front row. My father's face was red with rage. Karen was standing behind me, her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it had become the most humiliating, devastating day I could ever imagine. The day I discovered that the man I loved, the man I had planned to spend my life with, was a stranger. A liar. A man who had built our entire relationship on a foundation of deceit. I need to get out of here, I whispered, my voice hoarse from screaming. I need to. I can't be here. I gathered my train in my hands and began to run. Run from the altar, from Lance, from Catherine and her children, from the ruins of my perfect wedding day. My heels clicked against the marble as I fled down the aisle, past the shocked faces of our guests, past the flower arrangements I had chosen with such care, past the unity candle that would never be lit. Behind me I could hear chaos erupting. Voices raised in anger and confusion. Someone, my father I think, shouting at Lance. The sound of children crying. The scrape of chairs as people stood, unsure whether to follow me or stay and watch the drama unfold. I burst through the cathedral doors and into the bright morning sunshine, the light stabbing at my eyes like needles. The wedding photographer was there, camera raised, ready to capture my triumphant exit as Mrs. Lance Wellington. Instead he got a shot of a broken bride fleeing from her own wedding, her face streaked with tears, her heart shattered into a million pieces. Pamela. Karen called behind me. Pamela, wait. But I couldn't wait. I couldn't stop. I couldn't face any of them, not yet. I needed to get away, needed to find somewhere to process what had just happened, to try to make sense of the fact that my entire life had been a lie. I made it to the bridal suite and slammed the door behind me, my chest heaving with ragged sobs. The room that had been filled with such joy and anticipation just an hour ago now felt like a tomb. My veil had come loose during my flight, and it trailed behind me like a ghostly reminder of what might have been. I collapsed onto the velvet settee, my grandmother's wedding dress pooling around me like spilled milk. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 generations of women in my family had worn this dress to marry the loves of their lives. My grandmother had been married in it for 57 years before Grandpa died. My mother had worn it for 33 years and counting. And I had worn it to discover that the man I thought was my soulmate was married to someone else. The sobs came in waves, each one more devastating than the last. I cried for the future that had been stolen from me, for the children I had dreamed of having with Lance, for the home we would never build together. I cried for the trust that had been shattered, for the love that had been built on lies, for the woman I had been just 2 hours ago who still believed in fairy tales. But underneath the heartbreak, underneath the devastation and humiliation, something else was beginning to stir. Something hot and dangerous and powerful. Bigger. Pure, undiluted rage at what Lance had done to me. At what he had done to Catherine and those beautiful children. At the calculated way he had built a life with me while abandoning his real family. At the lies he had told day after day for 3 years. A soft knock at the door interrupted my spiral into fury. Pamela. Honey's mom. Can I come in? I wiped my face with the back of my hand, trying to compose myself. Come in. My mother entered, her face streaked with tears, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. She crossed the room and sat beside me, pulling me into her arms the way she had when I was a child and had fallen and scraped my knee. Oh, sweetheart, she whispered, stroking my hair. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Did you know? I asked, my voice muffled against her shoulder. Did anyone know? Of course not, she said firmly. Pamela, if we had had even the slightest suspicion, we would have told you immediately. We all loved Lance. We all thought he was perfect for you. Perfect for me. The man who had been living a double life for 3 years had seemed perfect. What did that say about my judgment? What did that say about my ability to see people for who they really were? What am I going to do, Mom? I whispered. How do I come back from this? How do I face everyone? How do I trust anyone ever again? I don't know, she admitted, and I was grateful for her honesty. I don't know how you come back from something like this. But I know you will. You're stronger than you think you are, Pamela. You're my daughter, and I know you have steel in your spine that you haven't even discovered yet. Steel in my spine. As I sat there in my ruined wedding dress, surrounded by the debris of my shattered dreams, I began to feel that steel my mother spoke of. It started as a small hard knot in my chest and began to spread through my body like molten metal. Lance thought he could destroy me. He thought he could use me and discard me and move on to his next victim without consequences. He thought I would just disappear quietly, too ashamed and broken to fight back. He was wrong. Over the next hour, various people came to check on me. My father looking murderous and ready to commit violence. Karen bringing tissues and wine. My college roommate Angela, offering to help me disappear to Europe until the scandal died down. But I barely heard them. My mind was elsewhere, turning over every conversation I'd had with Lance. Every moment that now seemed suspicious. Every lie he must have told to maintain his double life. By the time the last visitor left, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to make Lance Wellington pay for what he had done, not just to me but to Catherine and those children. I was going to make sure he faced consequences for his actions that went far beyond a ruined wedding day. But first I needed to know everything. I needed to understand the full scope of his deception, the complete picture of the life he had been living. And I knew exactly where to start. 2 hours later, I had changed out of my wedding dress and into jeans and a sweater. The first time in months I hadn't been thinking about wedding details or bridal beauty routines. I looked like myself again, just Pamela, not the bride. It was strangely liberating. I drove to the hotel where I suspected Catherine was staying. The Marriott downtown, the only decent hotel within reasonable distance of the cathedral. My instincts proved correct. I found her in the lobby restaurant, her 3 children sharing a basket of chicken fingers while she picked at a Caesar salad. "Pamela," she said when she saw me approaching. She looked surprised but not unwelcome. I wasn't sure if, "How are you holding up?" "I've been better," I said, managing a weak smile. "Can we talk? I mean really talk." She nodded and signaled to the kids. "Michael, can you keep an eye on your sister and brother while I talk to Miss Pamela? We'll be right over there." She pointed to a quiet corner of the restaurant. We settled into a booth and for a moment we just looked at each other. 2 women whose lives had been destroyed by the same man, sitting across from each other in the aftermath of chaos. "I need to know," I said finally. "Everything. I need to know who I was really living with for 3 years. Catherine took a deep breath. "His name is Lance Casper Wellington. He's 34 years old, born in Denver, Colorado. We met in college. University of Colorado Boulder. We got married when I was 23 and he was 25. Michael was born the next year, Benny 2 years after that, and Julia 3 years ago." She paused, her eyes growing distant. "He was a good husband for a while. Attentive, loving, excited about being a father. But as his architecture firm grew more successful, he started traveling more. He became distant, distracted. He started talking about needing more space, more time to think." "When did he leave?" I asked. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days ago," she said without hesitation. "He said he needed to go to Chicago for a project. A big commercial development that would set up our future," he said. "He'd be gone for a month, maybe 6 weeks. That was the last time I saw him until today. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days ago. Just 2 weeks before Lance and I had met at that coffee shop near my office. 2 weeks before he had charmed me with his smile and his architectural drawings and his stories about traveling for work. Did he call? Right? Send money?" Catherine's laugh was bitter. "For the first 6 months, yes. Sporadic phone calls, usually when the kids were at school so he wouldn't have to talk to them. He'd say he was almost finished with the project, that he'd be home soon. He sent money for a while, but even that stopped after the first year. How did you survive? How did you take care of 3 kids on your own?" "I went back to work as a paralegal. My parents helped with childcare. We sold the house and moved into a smaller apartment. We made it work, but barely." She looked across the restaurant at her children who were now coloring on the kids' menus. "Michael asks about his father every week. Benny has stopped asking, but I see the hurt in his eyes. Julia barely remembers him, and maybe that's for the best." The full weight of Lance's betrayal was beginning to sink in. It wasn't just that he had lied to me, he had abandoned 3 children. He had left Catherine to struggle as a single mother while he was playing house with me in Chicago. letting me believe I was his first and only love. How did you find out about me? I asked. 6 months ago I hired a private investigator. I needed to know if Lance was alive, if he was planning to come back, if I should file for divorce. The investigator found him in Chicago, living in what I now know was your apartment. He had photographs of Lance taking you to dinner, walking hand in hand through Millennium Park, shopping for furniture together. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I brought these for you. I thought you should see them. My hands shook as I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of photographs. There we were, Lance and me, captured in moments I remembered fondly. Coming out of my favorite restaurant. Kissing on the steps of the Art Institute. Laughing together at the farmer's market. But seeing these images through Catherine's eyes, knowing that they were surveillance photos documenting her husband's adultery, transformed every memory. What had felt like love now looked like betrayal. What had felt like intimacy now looked like deception. There are more, Catherine said quietly. Pictures of him at real estate offices, looking at engagement rings, meeting with wedding planners. The investigator documented everything. Jesus, I breathed. He was planning to marry me while still married to you. Bigamy, she confirmed. It's a felony in most states. The word hung in the air between us, loaded with possibility. Lance hadn't just committed adultery, he had been planning to commit a serious crime. He had been willing to make me an unwitting accomplice to bigamy rather than face the consequences of his lies. What are you going to do? I asked. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, she admitted. I came here today because I couldn't let him do to you what he did to me. But now I'm not sure what comes next. Do I file for divorce? Do I try to get him to come back for the children's sake? Do I press charges? An idea was beginning to form in my mind. A terrible, wonderful, perfect idea. What if we worked together? I said slowly. What if we made sure he faced real consequences for what he's done to both of us? Catherine looked at me with surprise. What do you mean? I mean, he thinks he can destroy people's lives without consequences. He thinks he can abandon his children, lie to the woman he claims to love, and just walk away from the wreckage. What if we showed him that actions have consequences? Pamela, I'm not sure. Think about it, I interrupted, leaning forward. You have evidence of abandonment, of him failing to support his children. I have evidence of fraud, of him lying about his identity and marital status. Together we could make sure he faces legal consequences. Real consequences. Catherine was quiet for a long time, considering. Finally she spoke. What did you have in mind? I smiled for the first time since the cathedral doors had burst open that morning. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a woman who had found her steel spine and was ready to use it. I think it's time Lance learned what it feels like to have his life destroyed in public. Over the next 2 weeks, Catherine and I became unlikely allies in our quest for justice. We met every day, usually at coffee shops or restaurants, planning our strategy while her children were at school. I learned that Michael was a straight-A student who loved baseball, that Benny was shy but brilliant with puzzles, that Julia was a tiny tornado of energy who loved to sing Disney songs. I also learned that Catherine was stronger than she looked. The woman who had seemed so composed during the wedding confrontation was actually made of steel wrapped in velvet. She had been through hell raising 3 children alone, working 2 part-time jobs to make ends meet, lying awake at night wondering if her husband was dead or had simply chosen to abandon them. I used to make excuses for him, she told me one afternoon as we sat in my living room, surrounded by legal documents and printouts. I told myself he was having a midlife crisis, that he needed time to find himself, that he would come back when he was ready. It took me 2 years to accept that he wasn't coming back, that he had chosen to start over without us. How did you explain it to the children? I didn't really. I just kept saying Daddy was working far away, that he would be back soon. Michael stopped believing me about a year ago. He's 8, he's not stupid. He knows his father abandoned us. The rage I felt toward Lance grew stronger every day. Not just for what he had done to me but for what he had done to this family. To these innocent children who deserved better than a father who could walk away from them without a backward glance. Our plan was multifaceted. First, Catherine would file for divorce, citing abandonment and failure to provide support. She would also file a complaint with the district attorney's office for bigamy, since Lance had been planning to marry me while still legally married to her. Second, I would file a civil suit for fraud and emotional distress. Lance had lied about his identity, his marital status, and his intentions. He had cost me thousands of dollars in wedding expenses, not to mention the emotional damage of public humiliation. But the legal consequences were just the beginning. I wanted Lance to feel the same public shame and humiliation that I had felt when Catherine walked into that cathedral. I wanted his lies exposed for everyone to see. I started with his work. Lance was a partner at Henley & Associates, one of Chicago's premier architectural firms. His professional reputation was everything to him. He had often talked about how important it was to maintain his standing in the architecture community, how word of mouth and referrals were crucial to his success. I called his office and asked to speak to his partner, Zechariah Henley. I told Henley that I needed to discuss some personal matters that might affect the firm's reputation. He agreed to meet me for lunch. Zechariah Henley was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone who had built his success through hard work and ethical business practices. When I told him about Lance's double life, his face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, anger, and finally disgust. "Are you telling me that Lance has been living under false pretenses for 3 years?" he asked. "That he's married with children?" "I'm telling you that he abandoned his wife and 3 children to start a new life in Chicago. That he was planning to commit bigamy. That everything he's told you about his personal life has been a lie." Henley was quiet for a long time, processing the information. Finally he spoke. "Mrs. Forgive me, what should I call you now?" "Just Pamela is fine." "Pamela, I want you to know that if what you're telling me is true, Lance will no longer be welcome at this firm. We have a reputation to maintain, and we cannot be associated with someone who would abandon his children and attempt to commit bigamy." "It's all true," I said, sliding a folder across the table. "Catherine, his wife, has provided documentation. Marriage certificate, birth certificates for the children, records of his abandonment. The private investigator's photos. Everything." Henley looked through the documents, his expression growing more grave with each page. "I'll need to verify this information independently, you understand. But if it checks out..." He shook his head. "Lance will be terminated immediately. And I'll make sure word gets out to other firms in the city. This kind of behavior is unacceptable." One down. Next, I targeted his social circle. Lance had introduced me to dozens of colleagues, clients, and friends over the past 3 years. People who had attended engagement parties, who had RSVP'd to our wedding, who thought they knew him as a successful single architect who had found love with a wonderful woman. I started making calls. "Hi Mildred. It's Pamela. Yes, I know the wedding was... Well, there's something you should know about Lance. Lucien, I wanted to talk to you about what happened at the cathedral. There's more to the story. Mrs. Felipe, I think you should know that the man who designed your house has been living a double life." With each call I told the truth. I shared the facts calmly, without dramatics, letting the enormity of Lance's deception speak for itself. Word spread quickly through Chicago's tight-knit professional community. Within days, Lance was persona non grata in circles where he had once been welcomed and respected. But I wasn't done yet. Lance had always been active on social media, posting photos of our life together, sharing articles about architecture, maintaining the carefully curated image of a successful, sophisticated professional. His LinkedIn profile described him as a dedicated architect passionate about sustainable design and building lasting relationships. Lasting relationships. The irony was almost too perfect. I created a comprehensive post, complete with photos and documentation, telling the true story of Lance Wellington. I posted it on every platform where he was active, tagged every mutual connection we had, shared it in every professional group he belonged to. "Many of you know Lance Wellington as a successful architect and my former fiancé," the post began. "What you don't know is that Lance has been living a double life for 3 years. He is married to Catherine Wellington and is the father of 3 children, Michael, Benny, and Julia, whom he abandoned in Denver to start a new life in Chicago. He was planning to commit bigamy by marrying me while still legally married to his wife. The attached documents provide proof of his deception, including marriage certificates, birth certificates, and private investigator reports. I'm sharing this not out of spite, but because I believe people deserve to know the truth about someone they may be considering for business or personal relationships. Actions have consequences, and Lance Wellington needs to face the consequences of his. The post went viral within hours. Comments poured in. Expressions of shock, sympathy for me and Catherine, condemnation of Lance. Professional colleagues distanced themselves publicly. Clients began canceling contracts. His carefully constructed facade crumbled in real time, visible to anyone with an internet connection. 3 days after I posted the expose, Lance called me. It was the first time I had heard his voice since the cathedral. "Pamela." His voice was barely a whisper. "Pamela, please, you have to take down that post. You're destroying my life." "I'm destroying your life?" I laughed, the sound cold and bitter. "Lance, you destroyed your own life the moment you decided to abandon your family and build a relationship on lies. I can explain everything. It's not what you think." "Stop." My voice was sharp, cutting him off. "Don't insult me by trying to lie to me again. I know everything, Lance. I've seen the evidence. I've talked to your wife, your real wife. I know about the children you walked away from. I know about the money you stopped sending. I know about every single lie you told me for 3 years." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was broken. "I never meant for it to go this far. I never meant to hurt anyone. But you did hurt people. You hurt Catherine. You hurt your children. You hurt me. And you were going to keep hurting us if Catherine hadn't been brave enough to stop you. Please," he begged. "I'll do anything. I'll pay you back for the wedding expenses. I'll go back to Catherine and the kids. I'll make it right. Just please take down the post. Let me rebuild my life." "Rebuild your life?" The audacity of his request took my breath away. "Lance, you don't get to rebuild. You don't get to start over again. You don't get to walk away from the consequences of your actions this time. Pamela, I'm losing everything. My job, my clients, my reputation. I have nothing left." "Good," I said simply. "Now you know how Catherine felt when you abandoned her with 3 children and no support. Now you know how I felt standing in that cathedral, realizing that everything I believed about you was a lie." I hung up before he could respond. But the phone calls didn't stop there. Over the next week, I heard from Lance's mother, his brother Casper, who had been his best man, even some of his clients. All of them begged me to show mercy, to take down the post, to let him try to rebuild his reputation. I refused every request. "He made his choices," I told Casper during one particularly heated conversation. "He chose to abandon his family. He chose to lie to me for 3 years. He chose to attempt bigamy rather than face his responsibilities. These are the consequences of those choices. But Pamela, he's family. He's my brother. I've known him his whole life. This isn't who he really is." "This is exactly who he is," I replied. "You just didn't want to see it. None of us did." Meanwhile, Catherine was making progress with the legal aspects of our plan. She had filed for divorce and was seeking full custody of the children, along with 3 years of back support. The district attorney's office had opened an investigation into the bigamy charges. Lance was facing real legal consequences for his actions, not just professional and social ones. "He tried to contact me," Catherine told me during one of our regular coffee meetings. "He wants to see the children." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that if he wanted to see his children, he could do it through the court system. That he lost the right to show up whenever it was convenient for him when he abandoned us 3 years ago." "How are the kids handling all this?" Catherine sighed. "Michael is angry. He doesn't understand why his father would start a new family instead of coming home to us. Benny is confused. He keeps asking if Daddy is coming back now that everyone knows where he is. And Julia." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "Julia doesn't really remember him. She calls him the man from the church when she talks about the wedding." The impact on the children was the one aspect of our revenge that gave me pause. These innocent kids were suffering because of their father's choices, and while exposing Lance felt necessary and justified, I worried about the collateral damage. "Maybe I should take down the social media posts," I said one day. "For the kids' sake." Catherine shook her head firmly. "No. The kids are going to have to deal with who their father really is eventually. They're going to have to understand that he chose to leave us. At least this way there's accountability. At least this way, other women won't fall for his lies the way we did." He was right. This wasn't just about justice for us. It was about protecting future victims. Men like Lance didn't usually stop with one deception. If Catherine hadn't been brave enough to crash our wedding, I would have married him. He would have been a bigamist, and eventually he probably would have found a reason to abandon me too, just like he had abandoned his first family. 2 months after the wedding that never was, Lance's life had completely collapsed. He had been fired from Henley and Associates and was unable to find work with any other firm in Chicago. Word of his deception had spread throughout the architectural community. He had been forced to move back to Denver to face the legal proceedings, though Catherine made it clear he was not welcome in their home. The court case was straightforward. Lance had no defense for abandoning his children or attempting bigamy. He was ordered to pay 3 years of back support plus ongoing monthly payments. He was given supervised visitation with the children, if they chose to see him. Most importantly for Catherine, she was granted full custody with no possibility of Lance taking the children away from her. On the civil side, my lawsuit against Lance was also successful. The judge awarded me damages for fraud, breach of contract, and emotional distress. Lance was ordered to pay me back for all wedding expenses, plus additional compensation for the trauma he had caused. But money wasn't what I was really after. What I wanted was acknowledgement, public, legal, official acknowledgement, that what he had done was wrong. That there were consequences for destroying people's lives. That he couldn't just walk away from his responsibilities and start fresh whenever it suited him. I got that acknowledgement. 6 months after our wedding day, I was finally beginning to heal. The rage that had sustained me through the revenge phase was starting to fade, replaced by something healthier, acceptance and hope for the future. I had started therapy, working through the trauma of discovering that my entire relationship had been built on lies. Dr. Shimon helped me understand that Lance's deception said nothing about my worth as a person and everything about his character. She helped me recognize that my ability to love deeply and trust completely wasn't a weakness. It was a strength that had been exploited by someone who didn't deserve it. You loved authentically, she told me during one session. The fact that he couldn't match that authenticity doesn't diminish the value of what you offered. I also found unexpected friendship and support in Catherine. What had started as an alliance born of mutual betrayal had evolved into genuine caring. She was one of the strongest, most resilient people I had ever met, and I admired how she had protected her children while still fighting for justice. I have something to tell you, she said during one of our coffee dates. I've been offered a job in Chicago. Really? That's wonderful. What kind of job? Legal secretary at a firm downtown. The pay is good and they have excellent benefits. But more importantly, it would be a fresh start for me and the kids. A chance to build a life somewhere new, somewhere that isn't haunted by memories of Lance. Would you take it? I'm thinking about it. The kids could use a change of scenery and honestly so could I. But I wanted to talk to you first. I know this has been your city, your life. I don't want to intrude. I reached across the table and took her hand. Catherine, you wouldn't be intruding. Chicago is big enough for both of us. And honestly, I'd love to have you here. You've become one of my closest friends. She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. I never imagined, standing in that cathedral 6 months ago, that you and I would end up friends. Neither did I. But I'm grateful we did. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. We saved each other, she corrected. 3 months later, Catherine and the kids moved to Chicago. I helped them apartment hunt and get settled. Michael enrolled in an excellent public school and joined the baseball team. Benny found a chess club that helped bring him out of his shell. Julia started preschool and made friends immediately with her infectious giggle and boundless energy. Watching Catherine rebuild her life, seeing her children thrive in their new environment, was incredibly healing for me. It reminded me that while Lance had caused tremendous pain, he hadn't succeeded in destroying us. We had survived his betrayal and emerged stronger. As for Lance himself, I heard updates occasionally through mutual acquaintances or court documents. He had found work with a small firm in Denver, though his reputation in the industry was permanently damaged. He was paying his court-ordered support, though he had requested modifications multiple times due to his reduced income. He had seen the children a handful of times during supervised visits, but according to Catherine, the relationships were strained. Michael is polite but distant, she told me. Benny barely speaks to him. And Julia treats him like a stranger, which I guess he is to her. I felt a flicker of sympathy for Lance when she told me this, but it passed quickly. He had made his choices. The distance between him and his children was a consequence of his decision to abandon them, not something that had been forced on him. 1 year and 2 months after the wedding that never was, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop working on my laptop when I heard a familiar voice. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" I looked up to see a man about my age with warm brown eyes and a kind smile. He was wearing a casual button-down shirt and jeans, and he had the slightly rumpled look of someone who spent more time thinking about his work than his appearance. "No, it's free," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Thanks. I'm Darren, by the way." "Darren Judson." "Pamela," I replied, then went back to my laptop. But Darren didn't immediately bury himself in his phone or laptop like most coffee shop patrons. Instead, he glanced at my screen and said, "Are you working on something interesting?" I was writing a blog post about my experience. Not for revenge or exposure this time, but as a way to help other women who might be going through similar situations. I had started receiving emails from women who had read about my story online, women who were discovering lies in their own relationships or dealing with the aftermath of betrayal. "I'm writing about relationships," I said. "Specifically about how to rebuild after betrayal." "That sounds like important work," he said sincerely. "Are you a therapist?" "No, just someone with experience in the subject." We ended up talking for 2 hours. Darren was a pediatric physician at Chicago Children's Hospital, and his passion for his work was evident in every word he spoke. He talked about his young patients with such tenderness and dedication that it was clear he had found his calling. But more than that, he was genuine. When I mentioned that I had been through a difficult breakup, he didn't pry or ask for details. When I talked about my writing, he listened with real interest and asked thoughtful questions. When our conversation turned to lighter topics, favorite books, travel dreams, terrible movies we secretly loved, he laughed easily and shared openly. After 3 hours of conversation, he asked, "Would you like to have dinner sometime? I mean, if you're interested in dating again. I understand if you're not ready." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception, for red flags, for anything that might indicate he was another Lance in disguise. But all I saw was kindness, sincerity, and hope. "I'd like that," I said. "But I should probably warn you, I have some trust issues." Darren smiled. "We all have baggage, Pamela. The question is whether we're willing to work through it together." Our first date was coffee and a walk through Millennium Park. Our second date was dinner at a small Italian restaurant. By our third date, I was ready to tell him about Lance, about the wedding, about everything. Darren listened without judgment as I told him the whole story. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you for trusting me with that," he said finally. "It must have taken incredible strength to get through something like that. Some days I felt strong. Other days I felt like I was drowning. But you didn't drown. You survived, and you helped Catherine and her kids survive too. That takes courage." I was so angry for so long. I wanted him to suffer the way he made us suffer. And did he? I thought about it. Yes, I think he did. He lost everything: his job, his reputation, his social circle. But more than that, he lost his children. They don't trust him anymore, and that's something money can't fix. "Do you regret the revenge? The public exposure?" "No," I said without hesitation. "I don't regret it. He needed to face consequences for his actions. And more importantly, other women needed to know who he really was. I may not have been the first woman he deceived, but I was determined to be the last." Darren nodded. "It sounds like you did what you needed to do to reclaim your power." "Exactly. For 3 years, I let him control my narrative, my future, my sense of self-worth. Taking back control of the story was the first step in healing. 6 months later, Darren and I were in a committed relationship. He had met Catherine and the kids, and they all adored him. He was patient with my trust issues, understanding when I needed reassurance, and gentle when I had moments of doubt or fear. "I'm not Lance," he would remind me when I got anxious. "I'm not going anywhere. And if you need proof of that, I'm happy to provide it." He did provide proof in dozens of small ways. He introduced me to his family early in our relationship. He talked openly about his past relationships and why they hadn't worked out. He included me in his future plans naturally, without drama or grand gestures. He was exactly what Lance had pretended to be: honest, consistent, and genuinely devoted. One evening, almost 2 years after the wedding that never was, Darren and I were having dinner when he grew unusually quiet. "Pamela, can I ask you something?" "Of course." Do you think you'll ever want to get married again? I mean, in general. Not necessarily to me, but to anyone. The question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on healing from Lance's betrayal that I hadn't really thought about marriage in abstract terms. I don't know, I admitted. The idea of a wedding still makes me feel anxious. All those people watching making vows that might turn out to be meaningless. What if it wasn't about the wedding? Darren asked. What if it was just about the marriage? About choosing to build a life with someone who deserves your trust? I looked at him across the table. This kind, honest man who had shown me that love didn't have to come with lies attached. Who had proven that some people meant what they said and said what they meant. I think I could do that, I said. With the right person. Darren smiled. Good. Because I've been thinking about asking you to marry me, but I wanted to make sure the idea didn't terrify you. My heart skipped a beat. Are you asking me now? No, he laughed. When I ask you, it'll be properly planned. With a ring and everything. I just wanted to gauge your feelings on the subject. And what's your gauge reading? Cautiously optimistic. 6 months later, Darren proposed to me in the most perfectly way possible. No grand gestures or public displays. Just the two of us on a quiet Sunday morning sitting on his couch in our pajamas, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper. Pamela, he said, setting down his coffee cup. I have something for you. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a simple, elegant solitaire diamond ring. I love you, he said simply. I love your strength, your compassion, your terrible taste in reality TV shows. I love how you've rebuilt your life after something that would have destroyed most people. I love that you turned your pain into purpose and helped other people in the process. I want to spend the rest of my life loving you, supporting you, and proving to you every day that some promises are worth keeping. Will you marry me? I looked at this man, this good, honest, genuine man, and felt something I had never felt with Lance even in our happiest moments. I felt complete peace. No anxiety, no doubt, no voice in the back of my head warning me that something was too good to be true. Yes, I said, tears streaming down my face. Yes, I'll marry you. We were married 8 months later in a small ceremony in Darren's parents' backyard. Just immediate family and a few close friends, including Catherine and her children who had become like family to both of us. Michael, now 11, walked me down the aisle when my father got emotional and couldn't finish the journey. Julia, now 6, was our flower girl, and Benny, now 9, served as ring bearer. There were no grand cathedral doors that could burst open with unwelcome surprises. No opportunity for dramatic revelations or hidden secrets. Just two people who had found each other after learning the hard way that love requires honesty, trust requires consistency, and promises require the character to keep them. As I stood at that simple altar in a backyard decorated with string lights and wildflowers, wearing a dress I had chosen for comfort rather than drama, I thought about the woman I had been 2.5 years ago. The woman who had stood in a cathedral in her grandmother's wedding dress, believing she was about to marry her soulmate. That woman had been naive, perhaps. Trusting to a fault. But she hadn't been wrong to believe in love, to hope for happily ever after, to think she deserved honesty and fidelity and a partner who would choose her every day. She had just been trusting the wrong person. Now, as I looked into Darren's eyes and saw nothing but love and truth and promises he would actually keep, I realized that Lance's betrayal hadn't destroyed my faith in love. It had simply taught me to be more discerning about who deserved that faith. Do you, Pamela, take Darren to be your husband? The officiant asked. I do, I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. When Darren kissed me as my husband for the first time, I heard applause from our small gathering of loved ones. But more than that, I heard something I had never heard at my first wedding attempt. The sound of genuine celebration, untainted by lies or secrets or the ticking time bomb of hidden truth. 3 years after Lance Wellington had tried to destroy my life, I had built a new one. A better one. A real one. And as Darren and I danced to our first song as husband and wife, At Last by Etta, I caught sight of Catherine dancing with her children nearby. She was glowing with happiness not just for me but for herself. She had rebuilt her life too, created a successful career, raised 3 amazing kids, and recently started dating a wonderful man she had met through her work. We had both survived Lance's betrayal. We had both found ways to turn our pain into strength, our anger into action, our devastation into determination. We had refused to let him define our worth or limit our futures. Lance himself had faded into irrelevance. Occasionally, Catherine would mention that he had requested another modification to his support payments, or that he had missed another scheduled visit with the children. But he was no longer the central figure in either of our stories. He had become what he deserved to be: a cautionary tale, a lesson learned, a chapter closed. As the song ended and Darren spun me in a circle, I threw back my head and laughed with pure joy. The sound echoed through the backyard, carried on the evening breeze, a declaration of victory over betrayal, a celebration of second chances, a testament to the truth that some endings are actually beginnings in disguise. I had gotten my happily ever after. Not the one I had originally planned, but the one I actually deserved. The one that was real.